Attorney General Josh Stein. My third episode of Civics with Stein is going to concern judicial review. The first week we talked about federalism. The second week we talked about the separation of powers and legislative, executive, and judiciary. Today I want to get a little bit deeper on the judiciary and what judicial review means. Marbury versus Madison was a path-breaking, perhaps the most important Supreme Court case ever. Chief Justice Marshall wrote it, and it established that the courts have the right to determine the constitutionality of acts of the executive or laws of the legislative. And let me give an example. I'm going to use partisan gerrymandering as a way to talk about judicial review and to talk about federalism. Every 10 years, Constitution dictates there be a census. We are in the midst of the census. If you have not had the opportunity to fill out your census, please do. If you tell your mom and dad, ask them if they filled out the census. If they haven't, do it with you. It's a great way for you as a young person to get civically educated about what the census is all about. We use the census to redraw legislative districts every 10 years. That's called reapportionment, because the population moves and we want the representation to reflect where people live, whether it's states or within a state. That's redistricting. That's normal. Partisan gerrymandering occurs when the legislature, drawing the maps, uses that opportunity to secure and add to its power. They draw the maps intentionally to benefit one political party over another. And here in North Carolina, for the past decade, we've been about the most gerrymandered state in the country. There are actually social scientists that said we were 50th out of 50 in terms of the representativeness of our democracy. And all you have to look at it is we're a 50-50 state. The Hill just did a story saying that we are the most politically competitive state in the country, bar none. And yet, until last year, we had 10 Republican congresspeople and 3 Democratic congresspeople in a 50-50 state. 78%, 22%, just not at all related to the reality on the ground. So some people sued and said this violates our constitutional rights of representation. It went up through the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court concluded that whether it violated the Constitution or not, they weren't going to touch it. There was a hot potato that they didn't want to touch. So under the federal Constitution, partisan gerrymandering, they're going to just leave it alone and not do anything. People also sued in state court under the state Constitution. And the state judges didn't interpret the U.S. Constitution, they interpreted the North Carolina Constitution. And they concluded that it violated North Carolina's Free Elections Clause, Free Speech and Association Clauses, and Equal Protection Clauses. These all exist in the North Carolina Constitution, unique from the rights that exist in the federal Constitution. And so they ordered the legislature to redraw the maps because they were an unconstitutional partisan gerrymandering. So here's an example of a state court exercising its judicial review, concluding that a legislative act unconstitutionally deprived North Carolinians of their rights. Same law considered by the federal courts, they got a green light. So this is an example of judicial review, but it's also an example of federalism. Thanks.